So I'm here with my dad on February the 14th, 2019, and he's been gracious enough to allow me to talk to him about some points that I have great interest in regarding his aviation career. So one of the things I had asked him was about how did he even get the interest in aviation? How did that all come about? When did it come about?
Okay, when I was I guess teenager, probably going back to almost a grammar school, I can remember we were able to buy paperback books that are now worth a fortune if I had only hold on to them. But they had them on aviation, and it was usually about World War I pilots and the fights that took place between the Germans and the Americans. There's a whole thing on that, and for some reason and they were 10 cents as I recall. You could get one for 10 cents, and so I had quite a few of them, and I'd swap them off with some other kids that were also interested, and that was the original concept. I guess it was the first I can recall being interested in flying, and the Spads and the Germans. And the Germans were always shown as ferocious-looking people, and the Allies, of course, the Americans, very benevolent-looking guys. So anyway, that was the beginning with the aviation. Then I started to make model airplanes, and
Keep going.
Started making model airplanes, and my father had a pool table, a folding pool table. You could stick it in the closet. He loved to play pool. So finally he had the pool table out one day, and I started to make an airplane. In those days you bought sticks of balsa wood, and you glued them together, and then you covered it with some paper, and special paper that you used a chemical called dope, which shrunk the paper. And then when all that was done, you'd paint this various paste things. It took a long time, but you ended up with a model airplane, which could be flown if you designed it and started out that way. But I never tried to fly any of my airplanes; just made them. And then I had 3 or 4 of them, and I had where we lived. I had a bedroom, and in the bedroom I would hang these airplanes from the ceiling. So finally, I had a collection of airplanes, and I had a collection of airplane magazines, and when I graduated from high school, and there was a depression, and things were very tough, very hard. I could see my mother and father struggling to make a living, and so it looked to me like I was going to have to go to work. So my father then said to me, I tell you what, your mother and I will make the sacrifice, whatever it takes, to send you to school if you will pursue something that obviously you like in aviation.
Wow.
But other than that,
wow,
we're out of it. So, in so many words, you didn't.
Right.
But
Right.
So I said, okay, well, aviation. And it so happens NYU, New York University, had a campus called University Heights, in the Bronx, where we lived, and one of the courses was aeronautical engineering. And there weren't many schools. I think Purdue, New York University, someplace in California. There weren't many schools that you could get a degree in aeronautical engineering. So it was also, and I could take a trolley car, 3 trolley cars to get there, or 2 trolley cars and a long walk. But anyway, it was doable. So, and also, my recollection is the fee was like minimal, maybe $500 a year or something. It was very, very, it was something that they could afford. And took my lunch every day and went to school. So I started with New York University as studying aeronautical engineering. When about 3 years into the program, so what would that have been, about 1939, I guess 1940, there was a recruiter came around at the New York University and said to our class, the aeronautical engineers, anybody that wants to learn flying, learn how to fly an airplane, we'll give you lessons free. So I said, wow, free. And flying an airplane, actually we were into it, so a bunch of us, but you had to go to Teterboro, which was in New Jersey, to get your flying lessons. So we went to New Jersey and used to commute on first was there was a ferry. It was 25 cents to ride the ferry, or 50 cents with a car. So at that stage, I guess, at that stage of the game, my sister bought me a car, a Model A Ford.
Yeah.
And I was able to commute to Teterboro. I just turned 16. I said, whatever it was, I was illegal in those days to drive. No, take it back. I wasn't legal to drive. I was year too young. So my sister, Yone, had a boyfriend in New Jersey, and he let me use his address. And so it looked like I was, and they had you could drive in New Jersey at 16, that was it. New York, I think it was 18. So anyway, now I'm driving back and forth to Teterboro, and I take a primary course. Primary course was in a Cub, very simple airplane. You had to start it by getting in front of it and throwing the propeller. And you sat in the front and he sat in the back, the instructor, and we started taking flying lessons. At the end of about 6 months, I guess, I had gotten enough time and to get a pilot's license, so I ended up with a pilot's license. But then the same program was evolving without me really knowing it. I guess without the country knowing it. We were preparing for war, actually, but it didn't sound like that. When they came around and said, we're going to take would you like to take an advanced course in aviation? We're going to do this in a bigger plane, and there's going to be acrobatics involved. This isn't just taking off and landing and going cross-country, which the first set of lessons were, and the smaller Piper Cubs. These are in Stearmans, they're biplanes, they're bigger engines, and we're going to do acrobatics. So, and that's going to be another about 6 months course or something. So, of course, yeah, sure, I'll take that too. And that's all free. So,
the acrobatics were done in what type of airplane?
But in this biplane, this was
biplane.
The advanced plane. This was a biplane. It wasn't a simple. The other was a simple Piper
Cub. Right.
This was This had a bigger engine. I think 250 horsepower engine. The Cub had about a 60 horsepower engine, and the biplane, you could start it with a starter. It was a formidable looking airplane, and we were flying out of Teterboro, where not Lindbergh, but the gal who flew around the world
who flew around the world.
Yeah, and
Amelia Earhart.
Yeah, that's it. Amelia Earhart had her plane there, and it was a single dirt strip. And just about when we were taking our secondary course in the biplane, a flight of P-39s, small single-seater, single fighters, Army Air Force. The Army owned the Air Force in those days. The Army Air Force sent in this group of fighters and stationed at Teterboro, which nobody questioned particularly, but thinking back, they must have suspected there might be an attack on New York, so they had these airplanes standing by. So all of this was evolving, and so I was called the primary and secondary flying, and then is when the war started, and the rest is history.
Right. So you answered my question about it was Army Air Force, but meanwhile, while you're doing this, you're still in college, right?
Well, yeah, it was still in college, sure, yeah, yes.
So you had a full schedule.
Sure.
Yeah, because you had to keep your grades up and study and...
Actually, I guess you could only go once a week for flying, so you could always squeeze in maybe twice, but I don't remember that. Certainly once anyway. And you could always squeeze that in somehow. In college courses, you can move them around a little bit. So by 2:00 in the afternoon, if you're free, you could go out to Teterboro and get a lesson.
So when the war broke out, are you finished college at that point?
No. The war broke out in December 7th. Isn't that the famous
Pearl Harbor?
Pearl Harbor, yeah.
And that was 1944?
41.
41.
So I was due to graduate
Right.
in 42, in the spring of 42.
Right.
So they moved it up a couple of months. Instead of we was due to graduate maybe in May, so they moved it up to maybe March, I forget, and automatically graduated us.
Right.
Because they wanted to get us into. And at that time, I didn't realize. Fortunately, I forgot that it was very hard to get a job during the Depression. Was just about coming to
Right.
an end, and a recruiter had come to NYU from Langley Field, and it wasn't a flying job. It was an engineering job. They were recruiting for engineers.
Mm-hmm.
So NACA in those days was a very elite engineering outfit, very elite.
National Aeronautic Cockpit Association?
NACA was the National Aeronautical Committee, National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics.
Oh, okay.
National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics,
Okay.
NACA. But it was a very elitist engineering group,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm sure at the time I thought, that, I'm not going to make this
Right.
because they were... But anyway, fortunately, I put my name in.
Right.
And fortunately, they couldn't find enough of these elitist guys, although they picked our class pretty clean of the... So I got a call. You want to come to Langley Field? Not as a pilot, of course, as an engineer.
And is this a government job or a private contractor? Government.
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely, yeah. In fact, I still get a small pension because for...
Wow.
Because I was there like almost 6 years. So if you're there more than 5, you're entitled to a
Right.
pension.
Right.
But the pension's like $80 a month, maybe something like that. It's anyway, it's something. So all of a sudden, the war is on.
Right.
Everybody's called. They're pulling everybody in. I get this message from Langley Field, a report for duty, report for work. So I also get a report, a notice that they're swearing me in as a second lieutenant in the Army. I forget what the Army Air Force, I guess it was, but not as a non-flying job, just as a officer.
Right.
So I told the guy, the commander of our group at NYU, I had this offer. In fact, there's almost an order to go to Langley Field. You can't do that. You belong to us. He said, you're in the military. Oh, I forgot. I had also been in 4 years of ROTC.
ROTC, right.
So actually, I was a cadet officer.
Right.
So either way, I was segueing into being an officer in the Air Force.
Right.
So he says, that's a civilian outfit, and this is the military. You've been working, or you've been an officer candidate, for 4 years. He said, this Saturday or something, we're swearing everybody in, and if you're not here, he says, then we'll arrest you.
Oh my gosh.
So
you have an offer from Langley that's a civilian job?
It's very interesting, yeah. So I called, I got on the phone. I said, I got this order. Like, it's not mandatory. It's sort of an order. It just says report for work. Monday morning. But so I said to the guy on the phone, I said, but I also have an order from an officer in saying that if I don't report to be sworn in, I had not been sworn in yet. but they would swear me in as an officer. In other words, I'd be a second lieutenant. It was like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the
guy at
military guy is saying, you know, we have priority. There's
Right.
a war on. And ACA is a civilian outfit,
Right.
and this is the military,
Right.
and you're in the military. So he says, if you don't report, I'll have you arrested. I'll put an order out for you. So I tell this
Wow.
the man on the phone, Langley Field. He says, look, all I can do is tell you that we have priority over the military. So I said, well,
Wow.
would you put it in writing somehow so I can show it to this?
Right.
So he said, okay. And he sent me a telegram. And the telegram says, Mr. Cavallo, report to Langley Field, you know, this is a preferential priority order, and you're entitled to travel and be here by, you know, in other words, it was a pass. It was, in the way it read it, you're free to come to Langley Field. If you do that, there's no argument. You can do that. If you don't do that, then you've got to report for duty as an officer in the military. So that was it. I took a chance, and I really, when I left New York, I really thought I was going to be arrested. I mean, it just seemed that guy. The officer was so sure
Right.
that they'd find me and arrest me. But anyway, the man from Langley Field was telling the truth. He says that, and Langley Field, as a research outfit, had priority over everybody.
Wow. That's interesting
Yeah.
that they would have that kind of.
Yeah.
Okay, so you share all this with Louise and Pop, of course, and that's around the same time you got married. Is that the same?
No, that didn't get married then. Well, of course, your mother and I were dating for years from the time we were 10 years old. So
Right.
I mean, and so we had made no plans to get married because it looked to me like I was going to be in the military.
Right.
And you know, who with a war on, you're in the military. You're not going to go get married.
Right.
So.
So do you report right away to Langley? Do they expect you to be down there?
This was like we're talking like Thursday and Friday.
Right.
Saturday, I think, was the swearing in. How did that work? Or was it Friday or Saturday? That weekend was the swearing in weekend for the military.
Right.
And my telegram said report Monday morning to Langley Field.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it was Saturday. I got in my Model A and went to Virginia. It took 2 days to get there.
Mm-hmm.
So and I guess I got there on a Sunday, and by Monday morning I showed up at Langley Field, and sure enough, they had priority, and they expected me, and said, "Don't worry about it."
Right.
So that was quite
an experience.
Well, and I hadn't been south of New York. I'd never been south of New York. In fact, I'm back in New York, so that was a whole new thing to go to Virginia or go to Washington, and driving down, you know, there was no interstate, so it was US 1 all the way. US 1 went through Philadelphia, went through Baltimore, went through the middle of Washington, went to Richmond, and then got on a side road and came down to down the peninsula, the Delmarva Peninsula.
Wow.
So it took 2 days.
Yeah, you just brought up an interesting point. So US 1, I think, if I understand this correctly, actually goes from Maine all the way down to the
Right.
Keys.
Yes, it's the last. In fact, if you take US 1, it stops right, and if you look across the water, you can see Cuba.
Right.
Yeah, it's the first US 1,
Right.
and it goes from Maine. Literally, it was our first national highway.
Right. So when you started at Langley, Dad, did you start as an aeronautical engineer, or did you get thrown into the test pilot program?
No, see, I started as an aeronautical engineer, which, I wasn't. They threw me in with a bunch of very smart guys. I certainly wasn't. I think, let's say, intellectual grade, some of these people, because they had been there for years, and that was our research, that it still is, our prime aviation which they're into space now. So I was with a bunch of very smart guys and intellectual guys, and I started working there. And as luck would have it, they were short of pilots. They needed a pilot or two at Langley at the time. They were looking, but they couldn't get they couldn't get pilots from the military, because the military was sopping up all the pilots they could get and training their own. So it just so happens they were short of pilots. So I asked the Melgoff, who was the chief pilot, I said, I got a pilot's license for single and multi-engine. Can I apply? Can I get this job? So, and he never said anything. It was all very quiet, but all of a sudden one day I was transferred to the pilot's office. So the pilot in command was Herb Hoover. Herb Hoover was sort of a tough Southern, and I don't think he liked the idea that, those guys all came up the hard way, through the military,
right,
through flying schools,
right,
and here all of a sudden I'm in the pilot's office.
Right.
So he said, look, in so many words, you're here, this wasn't my idea, it's Mel's idea, so, but either you ship up or you're going to ship out real fast.
Right.
He said, he says, I'm not running a flying school.
Right.
This guy tells
right.
me. So I said, that's the message,
Right.
So as luck would have it, I shaped up. That's a whole...
Another, right.
Yeah, the experiences of going through, but they tried a couple of other guys who flunked out. Mel was not an easy man to get along with, and so that part was sort of touch and go. But if I didn't make it as a pilot, I would have been back as an engineer, which I could have suffered through. I didn't really enjoy it the way flying,
right?
But I could do it,
How difficult was the transition from your experience at Teterboro to all of a sudden you're being put in the P? Is the P-51 the first plane that they were testing you out on?
No. Interestingly enough, they had a couple of. They had one plane, a small plane, that would be equivalent to the biplane that I was flying at Teterboro, about the same, I guess, category.
Okay.
And what they were doing was they were trying new wings, new airfoils.
Uh-huh.
So it had the capability. They would take one wing off and put another wing on, and you'd fly it.
Right.
But it was a small engine, 250.
That in itself sounds dangerous.
Like test flying.
Right. Right.
Test flying.
Dangerous proposition.
Dangerous.
Right.
I bailed out of a P-51 on fire. And
I want to get to that story in a minute.
That's way down the road.
Yeah.
But yes.
So you were fast-tracked, basically.
Yeah. Well, first I did maybe 100 hours, 150 hours in this. And then they had a plane called an F-6F, built by Grumman, the Hellcat, which was a fighter, but it was surprisingly easy to fly. It was, I don't know by design, because most of the fighters were not, but this one was. It was, when I say easy to fly, it was stable. It didn't do erratic things. When you turn the wheel of a car to the right and let go, you expect the wheel to come back.
Right.
Well, things like that.
Right.
It was aerodynamically stable. So Herb said, okay, from here we'll put you in this one, this F-6F, and the first flight, now that would be the first flight in a really significant 2,000 horsepower engine.
And are you soloing now at this?
Yeah, now he's going
they just throw you in the plane and take...
it's a single-seater.
Right, right, you have no choice.
All they can do is talk you through it.
Right.
And then, by that time you've had flown other stuff.
Right.
Not this
right.
category.
Powerful.
But they figured, look, you've either got it figured out. It's like pushing somebody in the water to swim.
Right.
Either you're going to swim or you're going to drown.
Right.
So pretty much that was it. So he says, take it around, don't touch anything, just get this thing in the air, fly it around the field, and then come in and land. And don't pull the gear up, don't pull the flaps down, don't do anything.
Leave it as it is.
That was it. He says, go. So once you get past that, now you're past the, you know you can fly a 2,000 horsepower airplane.
Right.
So then from then on, it's easy
for you.
You're in the big league now. You're in the big league. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And did Herbie change his attitude with you or was he always tough on you?
Yeah, he was always a tough guy. I think though, I found out later with conversation, they tried to bring 2 or 3 other guys in after me, and he flunked them out. He washed them out.
Wow.
So I think he thought I was competent, and I think he liked me. He was especially, but he was a rough, tough. His history is fantastic. I mean, he flew before the war in South America as one of these pilots, like a smuggler, in a sense, or he was flying for Exxon, and he flew for the company. But there was those are the years when Venezuela was dirt fields, not the category it is today. Anyway, for some reason, when your brother was born, we had a lot of trouble. Your mother and I had a lot of trouble with him. We couldn't keep milk down. In those days, now the war is on, so you had milk or that you buy in a store.
Dad, before you go down that path, okay, once you signed on as a test pilot, there was no way that you were going to go into war. That was your job, and that's where you were going to stay.
Very, very high priority job.
Okay.
Very high priority job. I mean, I didn't realize it at the time. I mean, they, a test pilot at Langley Field, because then they also opened a field at Cleveland, and they opened a field in the West Coast.
Edwards.
Yeah, and then they began to branch out. Right. So
these were important jobs, and they weren't going to let you go off to battle. And
no, I had a card I could clear myself in a LaGuardia. If I wanted to land in LaGuardia, they'd have to open it up.
Wow.
I mean, we had
priority.
We had priority.
Right. Okay. So you were saying you were having trouble with Stephen and getting his milk down.
Oh, the reason I was talking, and we were discussing this one in the pilot's office. And Herb he's maybe 6-7 years older than I was, but he had gotten married also and had a child that in the hospital before the child came out had, what is it called?
Colic?
Spinal meningitis.
Oh.
Spinal meningitis, I think. So he had a terrible time with his first born. So all of a sudden...
Dad, we have to stop for 1 second.